Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Music for a Book podcast, Season 3. We are your hosts. I'm Britt.
I'm Hannah.
And every 2 weeks, we read and review a book, assign a song to that book, draw the parallels between the two, and have some fun along the way. So welcome back to Season 3, Episode 13 of the Music for a Book podcast.
Yes. And this week, we are wrapping up Season 3 because how? But we wanted to end it with one of our favorite genres, and we found a super twisty, kept us on our toes thriller, which is Look Closer by David Ellis.
Yes, and how this episode is going to work is we are going to go over trigger warnings and a brief synopsis for the book. Then we're going to reveal our song choices, the best part of the podcast. After our song choices, we move into what we like to call spoiler territory, meaning that after that point, we will be discussing anything and everything that happened cover to cover inside of Look Closer. And from the jump, we're talking about everything that happened at the end. So if you don't want it spoiled for you, you want to read the book, pause the podcast and come back then. If you've read the book or you're just here for the vibes, welcome on in. We're happy to have you. Dear reader. So some book and theme warnings. We did get these from Storygraph. This book has murder, suicide, infidelity, sexual content, death of a parent, addiction, drug abuse and drug use, as well as some mental illness. This is a super twisty thriller. There are some graphic parts, but it's not like a horror novel. But as always, you know yourself best, so check your triggers if you have any concerns.
Synopsis, also from Storygraph. Simon and Vicky couldn't seem more normal. A wealthy Chicago couple, he is a respected law professor, she's an advocate for domestic violence victims. A stable, if unexciting marriage. But one thing's for sure. Absolutely nothing is what it seems. The pair are far from normal, and one of them just may be a killer. When the body of a beautiful socialite is found hanging in a mansion of a nearby suburb, Simon and Vicky's secrets begin to unravel. A secret whirlwind affair, a $20 million trust fund about to come due. A decades-long grudge and obsession with revenge. These are just a few of the lies that make up the complex web, and they will have devastating consequences. And while both Vicky and Simon are liars, just who exactly is conning who?
Oh, are you ready to talk about our song choices?
Yes.
Okay. I have a song I'm very excited for. I was definitely going to pick a Taylor song. Like, I was just looking through the roster, and I was like, you know what? I feel like I want a Taylor song. And I said, no, I'm going to pick something different. So I did a little throwback. And I picked You're Gonna Go Far Kid by The Offspring.
Okay. Okay. I like it. I picked an artist that I don't think we've picked on the pod before, which I'm surprised for like my musical taste. But I picked Muddy Feet by Miley Cyrus featuring Sia.
I don't think we featured any Miley Cyrus. I actually don't think I've heard that Miley song.
Oh my gosh. It was when her album came out. It came out on the same album as Flowers.
Oh.
And I like became obsessed with this song, but it's literally about cheating. Spoiler. And I was worried that it was going to be like my top song of the year. And I was like, people, don't worry. Don't worry about my marriage. We're solid.
Ryan and I are fine.
Ryan and I both love this song. So yeah, it's good. It's one of my faves.
Beautiful. Well, it wasn't actually a spoiler. That was in the trigger warning, so we're fine.
Exactly.
All right, y'all. It's time to strap in because we're going hard for our season 3 finale with a wild thriller that had multiple timelines, multiple POVs. Yeah. You didn't know who to trust at any given moment. I didn't know who to trust up until the very last page, if I'm being completely honest with you. So if you have not read Look Closer by David Ellis and you want to, and you don't want spoilers, back the frick out now. Back it up, because we are about to crack this book wide open.
Yep. Okay, cool. So we've been waiting for a thriller to really like thrill and grip us. How did it live up to your expectations?
I did not read anything about this book. All that I knew was that a few bookstagrammers, book talkers, and a couple of people that I know rated it really high and said that they loved it. And I said, that is enough for me. That is enough for me. Usually with thrillers, I don't have like very many triggers or anything like that. So I feel like it lived up to most of my expectations. I feel like it lived up to most of them.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I think
I was going to say, what about you?
I think for me, I didn't really have expectations.
Okay.
I tried to be very neutral about it.
Mhm.
But like I heard good things, so I was like, okay.
Yes.
I know it won't be like
A tragedy.
horrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it lived up to my expectations.
Yeah. Did you guess any of the plot twists, or did you have like an inkling of anything?
I didn't guess one kind of.
Okay.
I knew like Lauren. I knew that she was the girl.
Oh, yes.
Like before even like it was
Yes.
revealed.
I guessed half of a plot twist.
And I didn't
So
think that they were actually like I don't know.
I was gonna say, so the whole diary situation with Lauren and like his relationship with Lauren, I thought that Simon was gonna be like a psychopath.
I thought
And
it was giving like Joe from You vibes.
yes, I thought that he like everything he was writing down was fully made up, but I didn't think that it was for the reasons that it ended up being.
Yeah.
Like he was I was like, this is not
Yeah.
right. Like,
Agree.
yeah. So I guess like half of a plot twist, and like maybe at like the 50 or 60% mark, I was like, something's amiss.
Mhm.
Something's about to go wrong here.
Yeah.
Now, this book does shift between multiple timelines before Halloween, after Halloween, flashbacks, diary entries. We have multiple POVs. Multiple POVs are in first person. Jane's POV is in third person. So we had like a lot of moving pieces here. So we are going to run through everything pretty much in order, but we'll probably be jumping around with some of our thoughts. But it's going to be a very, very abridged version of the book because there are so many small details. But we open up chapter 1. We open literally with a bang on Halloween night, and Simon Tobias is standing inside of Lauren Betancourt's house in Grace Village. This is set in Chicago and Illinois, and she is hanging from the balcony dead in her Halloween costume. So Simon leaves super overwhelmed, like he simply cannot continue. He hides and texts Lauren from his green burner phone that he loves her and he promises that he's coming to her, pulls out a large kitchen knife that he brought just in case, and then the scene cuts away. So what a way to start.
Right?
The first thing though, and if you guys listened to the We Used to Live Here episode that we did, or you read We Used to Live Here, as soon as I saw green burner phone and green notebook, I was like, it's following
Green. Yep. Pay attention to the colors.
Yes. Immediately I was like, why does it have to be green? And why does the notebook have to be green? So like something about that, I think because we were so on like the colors for We Used to Live Here made me like hyper focus on it immediately.
No, agreed.
Yeah.
But that first chapter I thought was so good, but like the whole time throughout the book, I kept like thinking about it.
Yes.
And so, because spoiler for another book, even though it's not really a spoiler, but the book that we're talking about in one of our upcoming episodes, she started it.
Yes.
Like starts off kind of like similarly where like you like know the ending. And so like the whole time you're kind of like wondering how it unfolds.
Yes.
But this one I thought was done crazy because like as the book goes on, I'm like, how does this tie together?
100%. And like,
how do we get back here?
Yes. With the other one that we're talking about, like I texted Hannah because that's for a Vault Track episode. So we're structuring a little bit differently. We'll actually talk about it at the end of this episode. You get more information there. But like, I felt like that book ruined the ending because of the beginning. This made me intrigued, and it didn't ruin anything because there were so many twists and turns to get there. Like, that was too straightforward of a book for it to do that plot twist at the end.
Yeah.
This, however, even though it was only following like 4 people in total, it felt like I was on a journey with like 18 different people.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So then we start off in our story and we go back to May, so months before Halloween.
Yes.
And we learn a little bit about like Simon and what he does. He's a law professor and he's applying for like the full professorship at his college. But he's up against this guy, Reed, who is essentially in the college world a Nepo baby. And so he's like kind of hopeless to get this position. And Simon leaves work and sees this gorgeous blonde woman, Miss Lauren Lemoyne. And he knows her from 19 years ago. And he follows her. And he gets her new married name, which is Betancourt. And he just becomes like fixated on her. Very Joe from You vibes, like I said. Like,
yes. Yes, and that's where we get, so some of these entries are diary entries. So our first diary entry that we get is from Simon from the 4th of July, and he approaches Lauren at a country club's party with a very carefully constructed plan to run into her. They catch up, agree to meet for coffee, and he confesses that he's in a loveless marriage, and on a Wednesday in a cafe, this is his chance to begin again.
And so Simon sits outside of her house and figures out her habits and patterns. She exercises a lot. Her husband isn't around a lot. He knows what he's doing is very questionable, but he feels compelled to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, Simon. And then we meet Vicky, who she works at a domestic violence shelter. And she's at the hospital meeting a client. And we also get to meet, while she's there, her little niece, her two nieces, Eminem, Macy and Mariah. We find out that her sister, their mom, is deceased. And she's very close to her nieces and their dad. And while she's at the hospital, since she works with domestic violence cases, she's trying to convince this woman to not go back to her husband, and the shelter is a safe place. Vicky does her best to try to convince these women that it's the right way, but ultimately it's the women's choice to whether to go or not.
Yeah. And for me, I thought Vicky's background, knowing now everything that happens in the book, made a lot of sense for the line of work that she's in. It's because she takes on a vigilante justice type of thing in her personal life, but it's she tries to control justice within the law in her day-to-day life. I feel it just made a lot of sense as the story unfolded.
Yeah.
And then we have another diary entry from Simon, and it's about his little coffee date with Lauren. And not only did he share a confession of a broken marriage, but Lauren shared a confession of a broken marriage to Conrad, her husband. And then Lauren kisses him and they agree to meet again. And immediately I was like, something is not correct. Something is incorrect here.
Yeah.
But then we go back to Vicky, and Vicky meets with Roger, or Rambo, and he's a private investigator. However, when Vicky was a sex worker, Roger was a client and he was a police officer, I'm pretty sure. So super great. But now she hired him to do background checks to check for updates on her stolen name, Vicky Lanier. So Vicky is using a false identity. Her real name is Vicky. The alias is clean because the alias Vicky Lanier disappeared from West Virginia at the age of 17, hasn't been seen from since. So she uses Rambo to periodically check up on things and for other purposes that we'll see in a little bit here. But she wanted to keep her name very similar. It had to be close to the truth because she has a tattoo of her name on her ankle. So what was she supposed to say? She just has an ex-girlfriend's name tattooed on her. And she just felt it was better to stick as close to the truth as possible.
Yeah, I was going to say a life lesson I feel we've learned from all these thrillers is if you're going to lie close enough to the truth.
100%. If your lie is so wholly unbelievable that people are
yeah,
interesting. What the fuck is going on there?
Right. So Simon meets Vicky for lunch near the law school. Just talks about a little bit about how they met right after her sister, Vicky's sister, Monica's suicide. They met in a support group, and the two of them did find healing together. And he tells her about his conversation with the dean and how the dean was I don't know if it's really your time, Simon, to be this professor because of his Nepo baby competition. And Vicky does encourage him to negotiate and not back down, and that he has options, but he declines using any of that.
Correct. And then we have another diary entry. The diary entries could become fewer as we go on in the story. We had a lot of them right at the beginning. So in the diary entry, he feels guilty. Simon feels guilty for betraying Vicky's trust. And right now, Lauren is on a 2-week trip to Paris. He promises in the little diary entry that he will end things once she returns.
That's what they all say. And so now we jump to after Halloween.
Yes.
And we meet Sergeant Jane Burke of the Grace Village PD, and she is investigating Lauren's death. So it's her first homicide, and it's really the first homicide known in Grace Village. And she's working with Andy Tate. They're working to reconstruct the crime scene. Jane believes that the perpetrator waited outside and then kicked the door until Lauren opened it. It does seem likely that she knew who the perpetrator was. And so the suspect did kill Lauren by hanging her from the railing And it looks like there was like a brief struggle because like she had like broken nails and it looked like there was a fight with everything there. There was no robbery or no obvious motive. So Jane like concludes that it must be really personal, that this crime wasn't like targeted for like the wealthy neighborhood, that it was targeted just for Lauren.
Yeah. And I really appreciate it because I feel like this is very like true to form, is that the pressure that Grace Village put on the police department to solve this murder. And it was like day 2 of the investigation. And they're like, this cannot happen in our neighborhood. Like, you must shut this down. Like,
yeah.
And I think that did sway the investigation pretty heavily against, you know, Jane's instincts. And obviously Jane was a bad bitch and Jane was correct. But man, it reminded me of, we've brought it up a couple of times, and I feel like anytime I think of like a rich neighborhood, I just think of Desperate Housewives. And it just reminded me, like, it would definitely be Bree Vandekamp standing up at like the community meeting being like, excuse me, I think you owe it to us in our neighborhood to clean this murder up quickly.
Yeah. Or I think of like Devious Maids, which Eva Longoria helped do. So it's kind of has like Desperate Housewives vibes.
Yeah.
Like in the first episode, like one of their maids dies from this dramatic death. And so it like reminds me of that too. They're like, this can't happen.
Yeah. Like, we cannot allow this to happen.
Yep. And so in the next diary entry, he tries to end the affair with Lauren. And she agreed and said that his morals did make him a good person. And they ended up, you know, hooking up anyway. And Simon was like, nah, we can't stop this.
Of course they can't. Of course they can't. And then Simon goes for a morning run. He does 5 for 5, 5 miles at 5 o'clock, just like his mom did. And while running, we get a little bit of backstory about this bully that he had named Mitchell Kitchens, which, like, what a name, who used to torment him at school every single day. He thinks about like his mom's law career. It's like we get little blips of the background of these characters. And obviously I know why, like those little blips all tie back together. But in the moment, I'm like, why are we thinking about Mitchell Kitchens at a 5 o'clock run? Obviously it ties in later, but I was still like, Then after his run, though, he goes to Wisconsin and purchases 2 burner phones, 1 pink, 1 green. Colors are important here. Pays cash each time, and then he lies to the clerk and is like, oh, we're just testing out minutes to see if like my daughter can handle a real cell phone, which, like, you know, in what, 2022, whenever this was, sure, that was a real thing for us is in childhood.
Yeah.
I had a yellow pay-as-you-go phone that had Snake on it, and that was my first cell phone.
Yep. And so when Simon leaves, Vicky does snoop through all his drawers and finds his passwords. And so she logs into Simon's trust account that was left to him by his father. And the account has $21 million inside. So Vicky looks through the profiles of different financial advisors and finally discovers Christian Newsom, who is young and handsome, and she makes an appointment. Then we get another diary entry from Simon, and he just recounts more details of this illicit affair. And he meets Lauren at her condominium downtown, which that's kind of where they meet, so they're not like at the house. He gives her the burner phone so then they can communicate at like specific times.
Yeah. And then we jump over to Vicky while she's meeting Christian Newsom. And she says she's basically about to come into like buku bucks, some hella cash, and she needs someone to help her invest it. And so she explains that Simon's father set up a trust, but the trust could only be accessed after 10 years of marriage for like these traditional values or whatever. There was no way around it. So she asks Christian if there's like a way to get around this, to spend the money without Simon knowing. The question was one that she would throw at other investors and they would kind of like fail the test. And Christian is like, I have a way that I can make that happen. And immediately you're like,
Right. Then Simon goes to the lobby of a building that used to be where his father's office was, which is the Chicago Trust and Title building. And he texts Lauren on the burner phone and they flirt back and forth. And later he texts her at night from an alley by a Mediterranean restaurant. Then they agree to only communicate at 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. and to turn the phones off otherwise.
Okay. And now that, like, when I was writing this outline, now that I'm thinking about this, like, and I know this comes into play later with like the cell phone data, but this was wild. Like, the fact that Lauren was never actually communicating and like everything, the back and forth was all Simon and Vicky. And like, I think it is wild how they like mapped this out so perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like, part of the plot. But yeah, just like when you're looking back on these little things that like you might have forgotten about these small details, I'm like, oh shit, like that he was doing that this whole time.
Yeah. And then after Halloween, Jane is continuing this murder investigation. Her partner finds out that the little girl across the street did see a man in a Grim Reaper costume standing outside the Betancourt house on Halloween night. They discover a hot pink burner phone kicked, important note for later, under the table in the foyer that Andy believes is the evidence of an affair.
Mm-hmm. Now we're in August, and the dean calls a meeting with Simon, and Simon has not yet withdrawn from the professorship application process. And the dean then low-key kind of blackmails him and alludes to an incident that happened 12 years ago and is like, oh, it would be a shame if everyone at the law school found out about this, huh? And is basically like, but don't worry, like this can stay hidden, Simon, if you withdraw your application. So Simon's being blackmailed, and again, by like Hannah said, like the education version of a Nepo baby and the dean, because his dad donates hundreds of thousands of dollars to the law school.
Yep.
And then Vicky finds Simon drunk after work, and he explains what happened, says the incident was his own father's murder. So there's like a lot of, I feel like this is one where like a corkboard probably would have been appropriate. And he was accused of, but never tried for. But Vicky, because she's planning on like jumping ship in November after the 10 years are up, she has access to the trust, decides to take matters into her own hands. And she thinks of this as like a parting gift to Simon.
Yep. Simon goes and thinks about Mitchell Kitchens again. And he thinks about his father's murder and, recalls that and how Simon would have had to drive all night to commit the murder and then make it back on no sleep to take a law school final. And one of the investigators of his dad's murder says, like, that would be the perfect alibi. And Simon's like, yeah, I did. I had an A that class, like, in that final. And we see him text Lauren again, and he thinks that that's the only good in his life right now. And the day after Halloween, we see our girl Jane again. Her, the chief, and others from the PD look over the transcripts from the 2 burner phones. So their running theory right now is that the perpetrator was upset that Lauren broke things off and came to her house. Lauren did promise to let him in so he wouldn't make a scene, and that's when he murdered her. And like the final text from the burner phone appears to be like a suicide note.
Yes. The quote from the book is, "I'm sorry, Lauren. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry you didn't love me, but I'm not sorry for loving you like nobody else could. I'm coming to you now. I hope you'll accept me and let me love you in a way you wouldn't in this world." So yeah, very ominous. And that happened on page 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
We got that very early on.
Early on, yes.
Yeah. And then in September, we see that Vicky meets Christian again, and he shows her like a super risky investment option that could make her a hell of a lot of money, but also tells her that he'll put together a lower risk portfolio if she wants. He doesn't normally do this, but he's like, but I like you. And Vicky responds by telling him to let his assistant go home early, and then unbuttons her dress.
Yep.
And then after they bang it out, Vicky and Christian discuss the trust. And they bang it out a lot in this book. They are just constantly banging, it feels like. Christian promises that he can get her access to the money without Simon's approval. And she tells Christian that she doesn't want to hurt Simon. But they agree to continue their relationship. So at this point in the book, without all of the information that we had, we fully believe that Simon is cheating on Vicky and Vicky is cheating on Simon, which causes so much distrust between all of the characters. Vicky kind of leaves Christian thinking that it's like best for her investments to like make Christian want her more, basically.
Christian leaves his office and heads home to meet his best friend Gavin, who is his partner in this con that they're pulling. Gavin handles the financial side and helps Christian fake his aliases. And they joke about the women that Christian has seduced up until now. And, Christian is like smug about his ability to keep Vicky interested, even though their sex could be a complication of their business relationship.
Yeah, and after we got that piece of information, this is where something in my brain clicked, and I was like, okay, I'm trusting not a singular person moving forward.
Yeah.
Not one. I didn't even think I could trust the detectives at this point.
Yeah, I didn't know who to trust.
Literally.
So we find out that Simon leads a group meeting for those who have lost loved ones to suicide. And he tells them that his mother, who was a brilliant law professor, had a stroke and was confined to a wheelchair. and like their financial situation just tanked. And his dad, who was a personal injury lawyer, couldn't afford in-home care, and his mother just refused to go to a nursing home, and she overdosed on her pain meds. And so after that, like Simon had to spend some time in a mental health facility before he was actually ready to go to college and kind of go back into the world after that.
We get more of the backstory here. So what Simon doesn't tell the group was that his father cheated on his mother. And so Simon knew because he was always at the office late at night, and he caught his father with another woman, with a very young woman. Like Hannah said, she was like, that's definitely Lauren. Now, his father like promised to change, but one day Simon found 2 empty like champagne flutes that were like plastic. They were tinted a color in an empty champagne bottle. And he realized that like the man that he idolized his entire life did really exist. And he was like, father's dead to me. There's a quote too on page 125 that was, the night he was found with a knife in his stomach floating in his pool was just the moment he stopped breathing. So Simon believed basically that like his father's betrayal, his own silence, knowing everything, was like the major factor in his mother's suicide, because I don't know how much detail we go into down the line, but after she did have that stroke, like there were a lot of things that were adding up. Like they didn't have enough money. They weren't in a financial position to support in-home care full time. His dad became withdrawn, and like there were just so many things that compounded one on top of the other. So the cheating to him was like the end, basically.
Yeah. And 2, because his dad did win like a couple big cases and then have the money, and his dad didn't like save it or like spend it on that in-home care too, which Simon was like, what the heck? Like you just want to live this lavish lifestyle with your young, hot piece on the side and not like take care of your family. So I know that like hurt Simon too. So then we get a diary entry from September, and Simon talks about his last meeting with Lauren. And Lauren could sense that something was wrong and just kind of kept asking him about what it was and everything. And finally, Simon says, well, my dad cheated on my mom and ultimately led to my mother's suicide. And so Simon worries that he's becoming that man that he despised, like his father, by cheating on his wife too.
Doing what Christian calls quote unquote due diligence. He researches Simon online. He discovers like the timeline of his father's career, his mother's mysterious death, and he sees that it took Simon 7 years to graduate college. Simon actually was institutionalized for a short period of time after his mother's death. He's suspicious because he sees that Simon was suspected of his father's death but was never charged. And so he also is suspicious of Vicky and wonders what she might have been up to the night of the murder, because for all intents and purposes, like Vicky and Simon have been together for coming up on 10 years.
Yep. Married for 10 years.
So they
could have been together before too. And so Simon goes to his spot to text Lauren, and he thinks about his therapist and how he learned to like not really, how do they say it? Like not heal, but move on but remember. So like just to kind of still think about those things, but also moving on and moving forward. And Lauren does say that she's like anxious to talk to him, but it needs to be in person. Simon is worried and asks her if like he should be worried, and she has no response. And then in the diary entry, we have Simon venting about this vague text from Lauren and how torturous it was to wait for a response.
Yeah, and these diary entries were so creepy to like, they felt very ominous, all this stuff. But then we have Simon thinking back about his first meeting with Lauren, and she was a 20-year-old paralegal at his father's firm, and he worked at the firm the summer before college started. So he thought she was beautiful, and she flirted with him one day and told him that he would grow up to be a little heartbreaker sort of situation. And then we have another diary entry where Simon says he showed up at Lauren's house uninvited. She told him that she understood why he hated being a cheater and didn't want to repeat Ted's like mishaps and mistakes in a relationship. But instead of breaking up, Lauren says, let's get married. I'm sorry. This was the chapter that I genuinely was like, Simon's making this up. Like,
yeah,
this is,
I was like, something is, yeah.
Like, he's delusional. Like, I did not think that this was like a master plan. I thought that Simon was legitimately insane. Yeah. And I thought like Vicky was going to turn on Simon. Like, she was going to do something to him because he was cuckoo bananas. So that's like the vibes that I got from that specifically.
Yeah. So Jane, the day after Halloween, does interview Cassandra Barclay, who is Conrad's ex-wife, who Conrad is married to Lauren currently. And so Cassandra tells Jane that Lauren broke up their marriage and was just really interested in Conrad's money. And Conrad is bored with Cassandra and wanted someone younger, so why not? She said that Lauren and Conrad were separated at the time of Lauren's death and that Lauren was a cheater and probably was looking for her next sugar daddy. And so we flash back to before Halloween, and we have Vicky and Christian. They continue their affair, though Vicky tells Christian that she is worried about jeopardizing the money for the trust, like $21 million. It's a lot of money. Christian is like, we're good, reassures her while thinking just about all the ways he's convinced his other marks that he calls them, like these married women before.
Yeah, that he just refers to them by like numbers.
Yeah.
Like he's the only one he's referred to by name. It's like number 4, number 7.
Yeah. And he like has this expensive grooming kit from a previous lover in his bathroom just so he can appear like casually wealthy. And he just he thinks Vicky is like the most gullible person out there and that she's just like wrapped around his finger.
Yeah. And so he makes like a big fucking deal about this titanium grooming kit. It's like a 5-piece set that was worth almost 9,000 American dollars for what? Literally just to flaunt wealth.
Yeah.
But like he makes such a big deal about it. And I'm like, first of all, ew. Second of all, definitely comes back into play later. Like part of me looking back, I'm like, wow, how did I miss every single fucking clue that was just laid out on a silver platter for? Because like, I usually can pick up on things, and I picked up on like a couple of small things.
Yeah.
But like, how did I miss that?
Well, and like the title, right? Look closer. I'm like, what am I missing? Like, what do I need to look closer to?
And I think so often we skip over the obvious details in like a thriller or a mystery because like the obvious is usually too obvious. But in this case, all of the obvious clues were what actually resulted like in the end.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just really clever. And like the more we talk about it too, I'm like, no, I really enjoyed myself while we were doing this one.
So at work at the shelter that Vicky works at, her and her boss like scrounge up the last change of what they can to buy grocery for their clients, for the people that they're helping. And Vicky does use some of her own money to cover the difference. And while she's on the way to the store, Rambo calls her and tells her that her alias has been compromised, that the body of the real Vicky Lehner has been discovered in West Virginia. But Vicky refuses to stop using her alias, and she just needs to hold on for like 7 more weeks and things will be over. Now we have this diary entry, and this is when I agree that I was like, Simon is off his rocker.
Yeah, like he's lost his mind.
Yeah, because, he's excited to marry Lauren. She wants a Paris wedding, and he agrees. He really doesn't want to hurt Vicky, but decides to do it after November 3rd so he can give her the $10 million out of the trust to soften the blow.
Then Simon just really decides, like, you know what? Fuck it. He ran into the Dean and Reed at a, like, presumptuous, very preemptive celebration lunch with his coworker Anshu, and he said, fuck it, I'm applying. Fuck both of y'all. I'm applying for this professorship.
Yep. Then we get a chapter from Christian, and he becomes angry when Gavin makes like crude remarks about Vicky and like her past and everything. And Christian feels tied to Vicky because they're both survivors who have had rough childhoods. And Gavin reminds him that like this isn't a fairy tale or movie. Like they decide to go eat at a restaurant downstairs from the apartment, which is a Mediterranean restaurant. Wasn't Simon texting outside a Mediterranean restaurant?
I think he was perhaps doing that, Hannah.
Yeah.
I believe he might have been.
And speaking of Simon texting, he tries to text Lauren and she doesn't reply. Later, she's kind of standoffish with him via text and mentions Conrad by name. Simon's frustrated. And walking home, he looks up and we learn that he knows who Christian is and that he knows that Vicky and him are having an affair. And he tries to not let it bother him knowing what he's doing with Lauren.
I'm sorry, what? So, like, Simon knows Christian and that Christian and Vicky are sleeping together. And Simon is supposedly having this affair with Lauren on the side. But, like, Vicky thought she was being secretive. And obviously she wasn't. Yeah, it's just there's a lot happening. But the day after Halloween again. So the investigation process lasts 2 to 3 days in total. Like, it is a quick turnaround. And the only reason it's a quick turnaround is because it's a rich white neighborhood in the suburbs of Chicago, which I do think he did a great job of talking about that. Like I said, with like the Grace Village, community and all that stuff. But Jane actually interviews Conrad, again, Lauren's current husband. And basically he just refers to Lauren as like my wife, and not in like the hot bookish way, but in like she's a possession or an object to like bestow kind of way. Conrad tells them like he's totally in the process of divorcing Lauren. He has an alibi. He hasn't seen her since September 11th. He's angry when he finds out that Lauren was having an affair, even though he was cheating on her as well. Pot calling the kettle black, baby. And then they discover that Lauren, though, this is where shit gets funky. Lauren was lying to her affair partner, who we believe at this time is Simon, because she said on September 18th that her husband was there and she didn't sleep well because she was next to Conrad.
Yeah. So this is when I started to just like go off the rails with my like theories, right? And so I was thinking of spoilers for The Drowning Woman. But I was thinking The Drowning Woman, how like, I'm like, what if she's sleeping with Christian and like we have like a double, like double there. That was crazy. That's what I thought. This next diary entry, we have Lauren pressuring Simon to file for divorce before the deadline. Lauren tells him that like it's his money in the trust and you can always pay Vicky alimony. Lauren says she's just worried about the money, or worried about him and not the money.
Which, okay, but at the same time though, her and Conrad are getting divorced. She lives in this really nice neighborhood. Like, does she really have to worry about money?
Yeah.
But Simon sits outside of Lauren's again, and he waits for Conrad. No sign of him. However, he then remembers having sex with Lauren for the first time the summer that he worked at his father's law firm. And she basically, like, how do I say this without being crude? It's going to be crude. She, like, pity fucked him on his birthday.
It reminds me of, like, The Graduate. Did you ever watch The Graduate?
No. You can still say the reference. I
know, but it's the whole movie. Like, it's the plot of, like, the movie. And, like this older lady, like, seduces Dustin Hoffman, who I forget who it is. It's, like, a 21-year-old, like, college graduate who's, like, seduced by, like, an older woman. And it just, like, reminded me of that kind of. I can't, like, The Graduate, like, it's, like, 1960s, like, I'm pretty sure it was, like, the 60s. I gotta look it up. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure we watched this in school. How do we watch this in school?
That's crazy.
I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna, hold on.
Little sidebar here, but in college, during one of my favorite classes, a lot of people hated this professor, but I loved him. His name was Frank, and he was an icon. He was a legend. A lot of people didn't like him, but they didn't understand Frank. Like, I understood Frank, okay? And for Christmas, he was like, because it was like a storytelling class, he was like, we're going to watch a story. We're going to watch the best story you've ever seen. We were like, sick, cool. And he goes, Christmas movie, best one of all time, Die Hard. So we just watched Die Hard. For the entire time. I don't know why that reminded me of it. I guess watching inappropriate movies at school.
Yeah. But no, I just texted one of my high school friends. I was like, did we watch this movie in school? Like, why
are you like having like memories of it?
But that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah. But so, yeah, basically, like, she pity fucks him, seduces him. He was thrilled. So
okay.
flattered.
Yes, we did. We watched it in my AP history class.
Okay. I mean, that checks out. I feel like they let us AP kids get away with a little bit more because they knew that we were like mature and we could handle it. But yeah, so spoiler alert, Lauren didn't really want Simon. Nope, she really didn't. But we learned a little bit more about Vicky's quote unquote other methods that she had presented to Simon about this professorship, because she's sitting outside of the ballroom at a super fancy hotel listening in on a secretly recorded conversation with who? Maybe it's a man tied to the professorship. Maybe it's the dad who provides hundreds of thousands of dollars to the law college. And she has her friend Melanie, who is a sex worker, and she pays Melanie to seduce this man. And she tells Melanie to finish up her college degree and leave sex work behind her. Yep. What a journey.
Right. And so Christian is pondering whether like Simon is capable of murder. So Vicky tells him about like Simon's parents' history, and she confesses that Simon killed his father. And she married Simon knowing this, and she tells Christian that it's his chance to run, but he tells her that, like, he trusts her, like Christian trusts her, and will stay. Then our diary entry has Lauren disappointed that Simon hasn't told Vicky yet, and he says he will, but then we're cut off because he hears Vicky coming up the stairs.
And then Vicky is like, here, Simon, look at this video of Paul Southern that I have, that you should use it for blackmail and don't involve the dean, but you blackmail Paul. So then he'll get his son involved and then you will by proxy get the professorship. And Simon's like, he's just trying to help his son, even if it's in a bad way. And Simon's like moral compass is more of like, people are innocent until proven guilty, and Vicky just believes people are all bad until proven otherwise and doesn't see a problem in like fighting fire with fire. But Simon, his love of the law is rooted in his love for his mother. And so he has this like warped sense of justice. And so he believes that he needs to like follow the law to some degree, and he doesn't want his job contaminated with the blackmail itself. And Simon has this funny thought that like, oh man, he really loves Vicky and he's going to kind of miss her. He's going to kind of miss her when she leaves him.
Yep.
Because he knows.
And so in this diary entry, October 20th, so we are like, 11 days away from Halloween and Lauren's murder. And Simon tells Lauren that he is not going to file for a divorce until after November 3rd, which is the day the trust becomes available to Vicky. And Lauren says that she has to think about that. And then we see Vicky. She goes and visits her nieces. And Simon uses that time to check out Christian's condo and looks for like points of entry. And he thinks about sneaking in, but decides like this is not the right time. So while Vicky is with her nieces, she thinks about moving in with her brother-in-law and her nieces. They have like a moment where they reminisce about her sister. He is glad that like her brother-in-law remembers like the good parts of him and not like the woman struggling with addiction. And because Vicky does feel responsible for her sister's death.
Then we jump to the day after Halloween, and Jane is talking to Lauren's circle of friends. Now, what's weird about this is that they all knew about the divorce, but none of them knew about the affair. And Jane is like, something about this feels not right. Like, why would she tell one and the other? And specifically, her friends mentioned that Lauren said that she, quote, missed sex. And she mentioned it a couple of times. And now, if we're following Simon's diary entries, they've been banging.
Yeah, she shouldn't be missing it.
She shouldn't be missing it. And now, you know, it could be real bad. So you never know. But we do learn it was all fictional. So that makes a lot of sense. But after this, another officer hands them an old report about Lauren that happens to involve Simon Tobias. And Jane is like, oh, I knew him a little bit from high school. Like, he was quiet. He was really smart, really interesting. But then we get another diary entry from Simon, and he's like wavering on what the right thing to actually do here is. And then Lauren tells him that she's pregnant. What?
Yeah. Okay, wild. So Simon draws up the divorce papers for Vicky, and in the diary entry, now 6 days before Halloween, Simon tells Lauren that he's thrilled to be a father and that he will divorce Vicky and before the deadline, and then they will tell her about the pregnancy, just like Lauren said. And like a side note too about like the loveless marriage, you know, between Simon and Vicky is he wants children, she doesn't. So like, you know, Lauren having this pregnancy now is like, oh my gosh, Simon's getting what he wants. And Vicky wakes up surprised to see that Simon did leave without making coffee. And she sees a green notebook on his desk next to his laptop, but bypasses it, logs into his computer, and she knows the password, which is I_love_Vicky with a capital V.
Of course it is.
Then Simon texts Lauren soon that they'll have all the time in the world, and he runs into the dean, who again loosely threatens Simon about his past to like discourage him from applying to like keeping his name in for the professorship. Simon just said, like, tells the dean that that the dean doesn't have the balls to go up against him and that he shouldn't underestimate Simon.
And now Vicky, even though she bypasses it to log into his computer, still goes through the green notebook because she calls Christian in a full panic and asks to meet literally anywhere except his office. So they go to his condo and she tells him that she discovered Simon's diary and that he is having an affair and that he has plans to divorce her. And if that divorce goes through, they will lose all of the money in the trust. And now we know that Christian is trying to fleece Vicky out of this money. So in a lot of Christian's like inner monologue, he's basically like his own hype man. He's like, what would you do for $20 million, my guy? What would you do? Like that's his energy. That's his vibe. But Christian is like, okay, Lauren must be a con artist like him. Like he's looking and he's like, oh, she's definitely conning Simon. But basically he's like, he tells Vicky to not panic. He's going to help her out. and he has her look for burners, and he also lets Gavin know what's going on. So he tells Gavin everything, and he uses, again, real names instead of the usual numbers that he gives his, quote unquote marks.
Yeah.
And Gavin dreams up of 2 scenarios that Christian is not on board with, either one. The first is just like injuring Simon, just like a little bit, so he's out of commission just long enough until past the divorce deadline, or coming in between Lauren and Simon. Granted, in terms of all the master plans in this book, I think Gavin had a couple of good ones. Okay?
Yeah.
I think he knew what was going on. But they agree that neither of them are going to work. And again, he looks at Christian and is like, what are you really going to do for $20 million? And obviously we have a bunch of Christian's inner monologue, and it's like, there's not much he won't do for $20 million.
Yep.
Because he's looking forward to retirement, baby. Like, the 20 mil is going in the bank, and Christian's hitting the slopes, okay? He's in retirement mode.
Yes. And so Vicky meets Christian, and he dramatically announces to her that he thinks that they might need to kill Lauren.
I was shook.
And I know.
I was shook by this.
And Vicky is like secretly relieved, but thinks it's kind of ridiculous that it took him 6 hours to think of it when she thought of it in 20 minutes. And Christian says that he will have to do it since her and Simon will look guilty. And we discover that Vicky has known about Lauren all along, and she does know Christian's real name, which is Nick. And maybe she chose him so he would kill Lauren. She's never loved him or thought of him as anything but a swindler. And she's swindling him right back.
Yep.
And I mean, Christian is just like big
talk
ego,
about full of himself.
Yeah,
like
he thinks so highly of himself, and
yeah,
tells Vicky that he will commit the murder on Halloween. And he suggests that they set up Simon to take the fall. And Vicky seems initially reluctant, but finally agrees and is like, I know exactly how to do it.
And then we pop back to the day after Halloween. So Jane goes to Lauren's. They're talking to forensic experts. And she tells Jane that there was a hot pink burner phone that was found under the table. And it was gently slid into the correct place by someone likely after Lauren's death, probably the perpetrator. And Jane is like, this is suspicious, because why would the perpetrator leave the burner phone if that was the only piece of evidence tying them to Lauren? Because if the burner phone doesn't exist, they don't have cell phone records. They can't be traced. And she wonders if it might be the spouse of the affair partner who's setting the spouse up for murder. And we see Jane gets real close in a lot of her theories. But then in another diary entry, a couple of days, 4 days before Halloween, Simon is worried that Vicky is onto something, because now she's being more affectionate than usual, because Christian is basically like, you must seduce your husband to keep him until November 3rd. You got a week. Seal the deal, girl.
So Vicky walks past Lauren's house, and she's done this for several weeks, which now we kind of know why. She's been doing that. And she talks about how she's made herself invisible throughout the neighborhood. She does find the Grim Reaper costume and a pair of size 13 boots in Simon's closet, and she purchases identical ones for Christian to use as well. Christian tells Vicky that he scrubbed her existence from his condo, and they confirm that everything that they bought was paid in cash, and he tells his receptionist that he's relocating, gives her money for severance. Then Vicky finds out that Conrad has been staying at his condo downtown rather than the one that he shares with Lauren. She pretends to be a journalist and asks the doorman when Conrad will be home, and she finds out that Conrad will be gone for a few days, including Halloween.
How convenient. How convenient. And then Simon texts from the burner phone from his usual spot, but something with Lauren is a little odd, which, yeah, probably makes a little bit of sense now, because in the moment I was like, she's just being sketchy. She's just being, a little dodgy, stuff like that. But no, he says he can't wait to see her on Halloween. And then this was literally one of my favorite parts of the entire book. I don't know how Christian did not pick up on what Vicky, I think she was able to talk to him the way that she did because his ego was so massive that no matter what she said, no matter what she challenged, he wouldn't have thought anything, because he's like, I am the big bad number one scammer con artist in the entire world.
Yep.
So you cannot scam the scammer. And so Vicky was basically like, bro, you need to practice with a gun. You need to shoot the gun. You need to practice. And he's like, how do you know so much about guns? She's like, I grew up in the Midwest. We shoot guns. And I don't know. It was just so funny because he was so blinded by his own ego and greed that if he opened his eyes and listened to Gavin for 3 seconds, Mans would have been alive.
Yep.
I know this is fiction, but So Gavin meets Christian for target practice,
Mhm.
and Christian can't even shoot something at 10 feet away. But they're like, don't worry, you're going to shoot Lauren at close range. But instead, he's like, you should have a backup plan, though. How about a rope? Like, take a rope just in case. So we see that Christian ties a rope around his Grim Reaper costume as like a belt, and that was ultimately the weapon that he used to kill Lauren. But Gavin is very skeptical still, and he's like, Vicky's just thinking about like the sex and the money. Christian's like, she's crazy about me. She's crazy about me. I don't know what you're talking about, Gavin. Why would she not want me?
Right.
And I just, that whole, like, that 2-chapter sequence was one of my favorite parts of the entire book, because you're just like, oh, stupid, stupid man.
Yeah. And so the day before Halloween, Vicky confirms that like this window outside Lauren's kitchen has been open for a week so far. So she like fakes a conversation to confirm it right outside. And then we have Simon as usual spot receiving a ton of breakup texts from Lauren. She tells him that it was just a fling and that she can't marry him. And like he's furious and tells her that it isn't over. And then in Grace Village, we find out that Vicky's on the other end of the pink burner phone, texting the breakup text to Simon. When he tells her it isn't over, she thinks that he is correct, but it will be soon.
And 3 a.m. and I'm still awake. I bet you're just fine fast asleep in your city. It's better than mine. I had to enter this because it said 3 a.m. and that was the only thing that popped into my brain when that happened. But at 3 a.m., Simon goes downstairs and burns the diary. He burns it. And then he opens a safe that contains Vicky's gun and 1 million American dollars in cold hard cash. And then he contemplates just killing himself real quick, but then he decides he can't let Lauren off that easy. He can't do it. So Vicky then finds Christian nervous and shaky. He's throwing up. He's not feeling good. And she's like, get your shit together. You have a job you need to kill a woman.
Like, we've made it this far.
Like, suck it up. Like, suck it up, Buttercup. And she's like, I feel like she developed an ick immediately for like how much weakness this man is showing over just the mere thought of doing this. And now again, in real life, obviously, we shouldn't have good thoughts about killing people. In the book, fucking hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. And then the day of Halloween, Simon is handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. He's watching the clock. He's alone. He's getting increasingly anxious. And then he turns on his phone to stream House of Cards. And he leaves the house dressed in his costume. And he makes it to Grace Village a little before 7 o'clock. And the big thing in Grace Village is that 7 o'clock, they have like a lights out for Halloween. And at 7 o'clock on the dot, every single one in the neighborhood opens their door. They yell Happy Halloween. And then they close the door, turn their lights off. The entire village goes dark. And that is a tradition that they have. And that was very important to the timing when it came to killing Lauren.
Yep. So after Halloween, Jane still feels that like the phones are strange, like the phone placement and everything, and that the text message might be fake that's on this pink phone. Andy disagrees with her theory that it's the affair's partner's wife that may have done it, and then they discover the size 13 men's boots. This is again where like the president of Grace Village meets with them and complains that the investigation's taking way too long. Jane does tell them that they believe that it was personal and they have several leads, including Simon Tobias. And Andy, her partner, tells her to tell them what she knows about Simon and Mitchell Kitchens, his bully. And so Jane tells the story. Like, Simon's been thinking of this bully like randomly throughout the novel.
I was so confused until we got to like the grand reveal. But I was like, dude, it feels a little like out of left field that we're talking about Mitchell Kitchens this much.
Yeah, I just figured it was like him like fixating on things, because if he was crazy, like he would definitely like have these moments that he's going to keep relaying in his mind.
What we didn't talk about at the beginning that just popped to mind too was Simon like calms himself down by walking through like word related things. So he's like, what is it, like bomb and tomb and comb all don't rhyme, but like why does this and this rhyme, and why does this and this rhyme? And like he uses those things to like calm and center himself, which I think also set him up to look a little off his rocker. Because we all do things to like mentally calm ourselves down, but the way he was written was very sketchy.
Yeah. So, like, the story of this bully is he used to steal Simon's Gatorade, like, every day. And so his bully was this big wrestler, and the time came for this big meet. Mitchell tested positive for drugs, and Mitchell claimed that it was from the Gatorade that he stole from Simon. And how could he prove that, right? Because it could have been from anything. And Mitchell did like jump Simon right after the meet and like started beating him, even like punched the police officer when the police officer came to like break up the fight. Mitchell was arrested and received a felony conviction since he was 17. No one can prove that Simon did anything wrong, though. And Jane is like, yeah, Simon was a mastermind. Like, he was probably the mastermind behind the whole thing. She also has a complaint that Simon filed that she believes, like, ties the entire case together.
Yeah. She continues to tell, like, his backstory because after Simon's mom's stroke, Ted's affair, Simon filed a specific complaint saying that the money was stolen, his dad's money was stolen by Lauren. Lauren was his father's lover. She was never actually charged because Ted, good old Ted there, put her name on the money market account so that technically there was no crime because she was listed on the account. And then the chief does agree, though, that that is pretty good motive for murder. So after that, they call the former St. Louis PD who worked on his dad's murder case. And they agree that, like, Simon is hella sus. Like, Simon, he do be looking pretty guilty. But they had no hard evidence at the time. And the main issue is, like, they couldn't figure out the motive about why Simon would have waited so many years to actually commit the crime and why he would have done it the night before his law school exam, pulling it off in like this teeny tiny window where it's like, it is just enough time to do it, but no time for error. They say that, like, it's pretty likely that Simon was the one to off Lauren, but he would have had to manipulate someone else into doing the dirty work for him.
Yep. And so now we're back to Halloween night, and Simon's walking through Grace Village, and his costume is a suit with a Barack Obama mask. And he sees Christian in his Grim Reaper costume from a distance. And he waits just long enough till he sees like Christian leaving and then knows that like the crime has been completed. Simon then remembers when he confronted Lauren after he found her with his father. She like laughs at him and is like, well, what we had was just a fling and like, you need to mind your own business. That was the last time he saw her for 19 years. And the last time he ever spoke to her was like that moment in that office. And that's why I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like, all right. And then he thought his father broke things off. But then he found that champagne bottle and the 2 glasses at his house and realized that his father was not ever going to change. And so he did agree to keep the secret from his mother, but then felt guilty when Lauren took millions of dollars from them.
Yeah. And then they couldn't afford the in-home care. And then his mother was going to be placed in a nursing home. She didn't want to do that. And that's ultimately what they believe led to her death by suicide. And then now Jane is contacting a friend at the FBI who shares her the CSLI, or the cell phone data, we're just going to call it CSLI, from the burner phones. And they were only used in 3 places: Lauren's house, the Chicago Trust and Title building, and a corner in the Wicker Park area. Jane is like, Andy, like, let's be so for real right now. This is just too easy. What, like, there's never been a case where like everything is just like, this lines up with this and this adds up with this timeline and this adds up with this timeline. She's like, this just doesn't make sense. And so the dominoes are cascading in a line a little too easily. And ordinary people might not know that even with burner phones, you're still connected to a cell phone tower and a cell phone receiver. And if you have access to the burner phones, you can get the CSLI data. However, Simon does. Simon does, because we get the next chapter. Simon is talking to his class about a legal case involving the CSLI data. And he then sees an article about Lauren's murder. And Jane is like, hello, Simon, I would like to interview you at your house. And he said, okay. He said, let's do it.
And then we go to Halloween, and this is where like the very first part of the book ties in like the scene here. So Simon throws on the Grim Reaper costume over his Obama one, enters Lauren's house, and is like surprised to see that she's hanging versus being shot. Yeah. And so he like texts back and forth on the phones, simulating a conversation that's supposed to be, now we know, between like Lauren and Christian. And it ends with Lauren telling Christian that he can come over if he'll be calm. Then we see our boy Christian in his condo after killing Lauren, and he drinks and tells himself, you know, Lauren deserved what she got since she tried to get between him and the money that was his. Okay, Christian. And then Vicky shows up and tells him that she was worried about him and that Simon might suspect something. And so she urges Christian to take a shower and she'll help him figure out everything. And I'm like, all right, Vicky, we got this. And so after he gets out of the shower, they drink and discuss how Vicky will have to just act normal the next few days. And then Christian starts to become really he just feels really weird. And he puts two and two together that Vicky has drugged him. And she puts a gun under his chin and tells him goodbye.
That was wild.
Mm-hmm.
That was wild. Because, Vicky, accidentally shoots the gun in a different direction. And, she's trying to make it look like a suicide, like he took his own life.
Mm-hmm.
So she has to pivot. And she erases all traces of herself from the condo, which Christian had already done. The way that she set it up for Lauren's death, he's like, you cannot be implicated because if you're implicated, you won't get the trust money. So it has to be me. And he knows that Christian Newsom is an alias for whatever the fuck his name is, Nick. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, I'll handle it. I'll scrub Vicky from existence here. So Vicky didn't have to clean up a whole heck of a lot of herself, but she is still a little nervous because one fingerprint could fully implicate her. But she arranges the Valium, the gun, everything is in order. She dips. And just as she thinks she's in the clear, Gavin holds her at gunpoint and he throws her into an alley, threatens her, and is like, he knows that she murdered Nick. And so his real name is Nicholas Karachi. He knows that she set up Simon and that he did a background check on her. He discovered that Vicky Lanier is not her real name. Her body was found. He realizes she was using an alias, but he never told Nick about her fake identity. What a great friend, Gavin. And he tells her that she needs to give him 10 million American dollars or he will kill her. Sick.
Yep. So inside Lauren's house, Simon does hurry to hide the pink burner phone, sliding it under the table. And he also looks through the primary bathroom medicine cabinet. And he feels panicky after he leaves. So he hides behind an equipment shed while composing the suicide text from that first chapter, wearing his Grim Reaper costume. And then he calls a cab and takes it to Christian's neighborhood. On the second day of the investigation, November 2nd, Jane schedules a meeting with Simon. And Andy tells her that he doesn't think Simon is their suspect. And Jane admits, it would be strange for the two of them to have an affair, but know from the text that someone with a religious name, which they figure Simon Peter is a religious name, that it could be Simon, it would make sense. And they find some titanium grooming products in the primary bathroom. Simon was just looking in. And Jane receives a call from Chicago PD on the burner phone, who tells her that they are investigating a suspicious death and looking for someone named Lauren.
Yep. And so the Chicago PD then show Christian's apartment to Andy and Jane is suspicious, as she should be, but all evidence points towards suicide. And he points out that Christian is a religious name, his boots are the same size and the same prints. They found business cards for Christian's office, which so happened to be at the Chicago Title and Trust building, where the burner phone texts had been coming from. In the apartment, they find the rest of the titanium grooming kit and a Grim Reaper costume. And Jane is like, fuck, I guess I'll call Simon and reschedule. The entire time, Jane is like, this is not right. Something is wrong here. So now the Grace Village chief of police is ecstatic. He's like, yeah, we got it. Stamp it. We're done. We're good to go. We have the murder, and then we have the perpetrator. The perpetrator ended himself. Case closed. Because he's like, I don't want to deal with these people anymore. The evidence is all there.
Yep.
Jane has several concerns, about the pink burner that was planted. Everything seems a little too convenient, a little too easy. She points out that Simon is also an expert in things like surveillance data, and he could be someone to easily, fake it. Sure. And so she thinks that Lauren is not actually lying about her husband being with her one night, but it ended up being a mistake because Simon didn't know that Conrad was actually there. And the chief is like, I don't know, Jane. You need to prove at the very least that Simon had someone with him to help him fake these text messages.
Yeah. And so Simon takes his cab to Christian's place and he keeps his Grim Reaper costume on, fakes panic, and just whispering that he fucked up. And it does attract the attention of the cabbie, who will remember him, which is the goal, right? Remember him as Christian. And so he enters Christian's apartment, leaves the burner phone there after sending the suicide note text that he typed earlier. November 2nd, Vicky, is nervous, just impatient. The police, come to her workplace and she's, scared that they're coming for her. And then she hears that they're just there to speak to a client about pressing charges against her abusive partner. And she's really worried about Gavin and all like the loose ends that were like left. Then November 3rd rolls around and Simon's doorbell rings. And there's a FBI agent there who is actually Gavin Finley, who is just posing as FBI agent. And Simon knows who this guy is. Like, Simon's a smart guy. But then we have Jane and Andy who are continuing their investigation. They know that Christian was a con artist. His real name was Nick. And they interview the cab driver who did take Simon to Nick's apartment. Christian Simon and Christian Nick's apartment.
Another one.
We had to have one, right? And they see video footage of like the Grim Reaper heading towards the condo. And Jane still feels like something's wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, and they go to like look at his old office, interview his former assistant. Yeah, Jane is just like suspicious with all of this. Like, this is like too wrapped up nicely with a bow.
Yes. Now we have Gavin fake interviewing Simon as an FBI agent. And Simon is like, nice try, Gavin. Like, an FBI agent wouldn't use such leading questions and wouldn't do this. And this is where we have the grand reveal that Simon is not married at all. I will say, I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
I 1,000% believed that they were married, even in a fake capacity, even if they were playing each other. I believed that the marriage was real, but they are not married. He says that he hasn't seen Lauren in years. He says that he doesn't know Vicky Lanier. And Gavin is like shook by this. And Simon says, quote, "It's almost humorous. This guy's a con artist himself in cahoots with a fellow swindler. And yet the possibility that someone swindled them seems beyond his capacity at the moment," which I think runs in line with Nick/Christian's, belief system that like they are above everyone else. And so Simon then talks about his and Vicky's revenge plot, that they met only 3 years ago after her sister's suicide. He asked Vicky to marry him, but she couldn't do it. When he ran into Lauren, they concocted like this elaborate scheme for a double murder. The diary was almost entirely fictional, and he wrote it specifically to trick Christian. Yep. Simon had truly not spoken to Lauren in years, and he had never had an affair with her.
Yep. And then so Simon tells Gavin, like, I know who you are, and that the Grace Village police are coming up the driveway to interview him. And he, to interview Simon. And he cautions Gavin to leave well enough alone and then to disappear, or the police might be interested in Gavin's involvement with Nick's fraud. And Gavin leaves, angry, frightened, yeah, I gotta get out of here. I can't be mixed up in all of this now. And Simon lets Jane and Andy inside. And Simon does recognize Jane. He doesn't know her well, but remembers her as, being nice and smart. Yeah. And Jane questions him about his relationship with Lauren and Nick, asking, his shoe size, too, because of the size 13 boots. And
he was an 11, by the way.
Yeah.
Didn't match up.
And so Simon does remain calm under pressure and under the questioning, and tells them the St. Louis police that they're jumping to conclusions based off all this stuff. Internally, he is impressed though that Jane knows that he could have committed the murder, even though the trail of evidence is leading him to Christian. Mm-hmm. And he explains that he was home all Halloween, streaming, House of Cards on his phone and handing out candy. Jane points out, yeah, your phone was there, but you could have left it. Simon gives them nothing, and so Jane suggests to Andy that they should go interview Vicky.
Mm-hmm. And Simon can't believe that Vicky's name has come out, because this was the one piece of the puzzle that they didn't account for, because they fully believed that Vicky would be kept under wraps. But they find out that they got Vicky's information because of his assistant, Emily, the girl at the office that he paid $20 an hour to sit there and do literally nothing, a couple of meaningless tasks because he wasn't actually a businessman, and to just do her homework. So Simon denies knowing Vicky. He wonders, just how close are they to this? So Jane explains her theory that Vicky was having an affair with Nick. She teamed up with someone who wanted Lauren dead. So they got Nick to kill Lauren and then faked his suicide. Jane isn't sure about the how or why behind it, but Simon says he knows nothing about it, but he is panicking. He is concerned. Andy and Jane leave. They said that they'll be in touch. Andy agrees with Jane that Simon seems to know Vicky, but doesn't believe that her theory is fully believable, because all of the evidence that they have fully points 100% to Christian. And Jane thinks that their only hope is to find some semblance of DNA from Vicky, or Simon or, anyone in Christian space or in Lauren's house.
Yep. And so Jane interviews Lauren's dad, and he justifies her actions and tells Jane that Ted Tobias gave her the money. Like, she didn't steal it. Like, he gave it to her. Like, Lauren was never worried about Simon, but was afraid that, like, Ted might have been following her, like, when she left for France right after to get away from him. And she returned once for her parents' wedding anniversary. She, like, reassured her father that, like, she would be safe now once, like, Conrad brought her back to Grace Village because Ted was dead. And so her dad was like, oh, there's nothing to worry about. Then we go to Wisconsin with Vicky, and she hikes to, like, this remote park where she hid a burner phone, and she texted Simon earlier, told him about Gavin, and he lets her know that Gavin's no longer a problem, but the police know the name Vicky Lehner. And Vicky worries that she accidentally left a stray fingerprint somewhere, and she's like, everything will come down to, like, a fingerprint evidence because they have no real evidence against her otherwise.
Jane is frustrated with this whole investigation because the coroner's office did officially rule Nick's death a suicide, which was kind of the kiss of death for her theory. And so the chief also refuses to believe her theories because he's under more and more pressure to solve the case. People moved to that neighborhood because they wanted to be safe, and that her case is almost entirely circumstantial. And so she's like, please, just, like, wait until we get the prints back from the champagne bottle and glasses that were at Ted's house. Let's just see, because she believes that those are going to belong to Vicky, and then she can tie Vicky back to them. They get a call, and the tech tells them that the prints were a match in the system, but they were not a match for who we think they were.
Nope. So then Jane shows up to Simon's house, bringing a bottle of champagne and 2 plastic flutes. She tells him that an identical pair were found at his dad's murder scene, and she wondered why he held onto the flutes for so long and why he waited until 2010 to kill his father. However, Jane finally found the answer to that, thanks to Lauren's Facebook account. So Lauren fled to Paris, but then returned for her parents' wedding anniversary. So where, like, I've a couple times it's mentioned, like, he hasn't seen her in 19 years, but then there's, like, a 12 years ago, like, the incident happened.
Mm-hmm.
Jane is like, you committed the murder, so then Lauren could be framed for it. And Jane, like, quotes and says, like, just so you know you did all of this. Your father, Lauren, Nick, and you're gonna walk away from the whole damn thing. As she's leaving, Simon's like, you're a smart detective. And she just tells him, like, that it would be a compliment coming from anyone but him.
Yep. And Vicky is out with her nieces. They go back to her brother-in-law's house. And on the way there, she's, like, rehearsing that she doesn't know Simon. She's going to lie about it. And she loves him and owes her sobriety and life to him. But Adam ends up taking Vicky into the yard after they, send the girls up and say that the police found the body of David Jenner, the man who caused Monica's death. David Jenner is an alias for Nick Karachi / Christian. So Adam is like, he's telling her how much guilt he feels over Monica's death, and he wishes that he could have killed David himself. Interesting. Vicky then recalls just about, like, turning down Simon's original proposal and telling him that she wouldn't be able to start a life with him until Nick was gone. Like, she just couldn't move on. So Simon helped Vicky move to Wisconsin, get away from Chicago, and she planned to kill Nick that summer. But when Simon ran into Lauren back in May, the plan, like, fully devolved into a double revenge plot.
Perfect timing. Then Simon's financial advisor calls him to discuss the trust, and he wants to split it evenly between donations to the American Stroke Association, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health, and the National Runaway Safe Line. And he also took out $1 million a few months ago, but does not specify what he did with it. And he wants, like, nothing to do with his dad's money. He wants everything to kind of go back and be used for good. Simon then makes a speech explaining why he became a lawyer, like why he chose that profession. And he tells him about being accused of his father's murder. This is, like, in his interview, basically, for, like, his faculty, like, kind of coming clean with everything. And of course he left out the fact that he, like, actually did it because,
that might
obviously
not have been good.
And he says, like, it sparked his love for law. And a woman raises her hand and asks if he is aware that a new suspect has been identified in the case. And he says that, he's aware. He was unsure if Lauren's fingerprints would ever be identified, but he's glad that it paid off and she was the one accused. Aloud, he just says, I want to put this past behind me.
Yep. Simon and Vicky meet in a forest to say goodbye, and Vicky thanks him because he made a $1 million anonymous cash donation to the domestic violence shelter that she works at. And he thinks about like the companionship of being with Vicky for the last few months and the intimacy that they shared, and he still loves her and he would propose to her. He would marry her on the spot right there. But he knows that Vicky needs to be with her nieces. She needs to take care of her family. And she says that she's regretful for what they did. And he tells her that he's not and that she shouldn't be either. So in the end, she kisses him goodbye and he tries to concentrate on those words, tells himself over and over again as to not think about her anymore.
Yeah.
And that was Look Closer by David Ellis.
That was.
What a book.
Right?
All right. Are we ready to talk about our song choices?
Let's do it.
All right. So I picked a pretty aggressive song, but I picked You're Gonna Go Far, Kid by The Offspring. And if it sounds familiar and it's been a while since you've listened to like some throwback emo music, I promise you know this song.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts off by saying, show me how to lie, you're getting better all the time, and turning all against the one is an art that's hard to teach. And I just feel like obviously with the masterminding behind the entire situation between Vicky and Simon, I feel like Vicky always had it in her because she had to like fight for her life between sex work and growing up in like a really terrible, troubled environment.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like teaching her the nuance and the art of not getting caught because he's an expert in all things surveillance, law, and things like that. And then it says, another clever word sets off an unsuspecting herd. And as you step back into line, a mob jumps to their feet. So like the burner phones, the text messages, just one little word, one little phrase sets off a chain reaction of events. And those two just step right back into line and everyone else takes the fall.
Mm-hmm.
The chorus to me, now dance, fucker dance, man, he never had a chance and no one even knew it was really only you. And now you steal away, take him out today. Nice work you did. You're going to go far, kid. That feels like something Simon tells Vicky after she kills Christian. Like, man, Christian never stood a fucking chance.
Yeah.
And then it says, with 1,000 lies and a good disguise, hit him right between the eyes. When you walk away, nothing more to say. See the lightning in your eyes. See them running for their lives. It is just truly like, it is a brutal song. It just feels very like, oh, look at all this manipulation. Look at all the things that we've strung together as Simon and Vicky. Look at all these master plans that we've laid out. And you are our puppets. Like you are our chess pieces. And then it says, slowly out of line and drifting closer in your sight. So play it out. I'm wide awake. It's a scene about me. There's something in your way and now someone is going to pay. And if you can't get what you want, well, it's all because of me. And it's like, oh, one fingerprint, one false move, one something. It could have been because of Vicky, because of Simon. Everything could have fallen apart. It goes back to the now dance, fucker dance. But it says, and now you'll lead the way. Show the light of day. Nice work you did. You're going to go far, kid. Trust and deceived with 1,000 lies in a good disguise. And it comes through with that. And it kind of repeats that all the way through. But at the end, it says, clever alibis, Lord of the Flies, hit him right between the eyes. When you walk away, nothing more to say. See the lightning in your eyes. See them running for their lives. I don't know. I heard it and I was like, when am I going to get to do a song like this? Very aggressive, which wasn't their tactic, but like ultimately in the end, like what they did was aggressive. Yeah. And it just felt like Simon and like showing Vicky the ropes of pure manipulation and like master scheming and tactics. But I just think it's hilarious to think of them singing Dance Fucker Dance, Man, He Never Had a Chance about Christian /Nick /David specifically.
I love it. I like The Offspring. I'm going to go listen to them after this. All right. So I picked Muddy Feet by Miley Cyrus, which I love this song. It has such like a good vibe and it's great. But it starts off with like, I don't know who the hell you think you're messing with. Get the fuck out of my house with that shit. Get the fuck out of my life with that shit. And so it's literally about like somebody, if you know about Miley's history, it's like Liam cheating on her and like, get the fuck out of my house, right? With that shit. And so I feel like that's like this vibe, like, Lauren, sleeping with Simon's dad and then all of the cheating and everything is just like, let's go, let's get out. The chorus is like, you're coming around with your muddy feet and I'm about to do something about it. I'm going to have to do something about it. And so just like how they like came up with this plan to like do something about it because Lauren had like her muddy feet and like Ted's muddy feet, like with this whole thing, and Nick's muddy feet. Like they're just like messing all this stuff up. It's like back and forth, always questioning my questioning. Like, get the fuck out of my head with that shit. Get the fuck out of my bed with that shit. Like, it just is very much like encompasses, I feel like, their thought behind the scenes too, right? Like, okay, let's get out of here. Yeah. And just like the motive behind it, like you watered the weeds and you killed all the roses. Worthy arrives when the other door closes. So get the fuck out of my house with that shit. Again, that line. But it just goes on, you know, saying like, you don't know who you're messing with. I'm going to have to do something about it. And they did. They did something about it. So
they did. Okay, I love that we both picked like aggressive songs.
I know. We really did.
We did. I'm excited to listen to that one. What a lovely pick of very aggressive songs for us both. Now we're going to talk about our final book ratings of season 3, Unreal. So if y'all are new or you don't know, we rate our books into the moon and to Saturn. I rate in moons, Hannah rates in Saturns because we wanted something different than the star scale, and it's our podcast and we can do what we want. Okay, I've been thinking about this because like we've talked about this. I don't know if in another episode or just talking, but I feel like I'm categorically harder on thrillers than I am in other genres because it is really hard to thrill me. And I think from the amount of times that my jaw dropped and the amount of times that I truly...
Yeah, your reaction pictures to me.
I was shook, okay? We don't talk about the books before we record them, but I do sometimes send reaction pictures as I'm listening and or reading. So I'm going to go with 4.5 moons. I don't think this was a perfect 5. I don't think this is in the same category as like We Used to Live Here or The Only One Left for me, but it is really, really close. Like I had such a great time with this thriller.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm going to do a solid 4 Saturns. I think that fits for me. Like this fits in that category just perfectly.
I had a feeling. I don't know why. I had a feeling that was going to be your rating.
Yep.
I was going back and forth. I was like, maybe it's a 4, maybe, but I feel like just from my shock that I had while reading, I have to honor that because I am just harder on thrillers in general. But thank you all so much for listening. So if you've been around for a minute, you guys got to lock in real quick because we have a bunch of information coming at you. You know that we did a summer mixtape after season 2 with guest hosts. And guess what's returning? Yes, we have a spring mixtape coming your way starting on Wednesday, April 16th.
Yep. But don't worry, darling, because we have weekly vault tracks still. So next week, we will be releasing our first ever Look What You Made Me Read vault track where I read a book requested by Britt and Britt read a book requested by me, and we'll be discussing both.
Yes. So Hannah has me reading the thriller She Started It by Sean Gilbert, which we mentioned earlier.
Yep. And Britt has me reading the romantic suspense All the Missing Pieces by Catherine Cowles.
Yes.
And we also have an episode slated right now that you will not want to miss. Maybe it's with an author that we are so excited to chat with again that has a book coming out soon. So be sure you're following us on all of your social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Discord, join our Discord, Patreon. Give us your thoughts in our Discord. Ours is a family, yours and ours.
The collective.
Yes. And on social media, because especially with our Look What You Made Me Read episodes, we want to know what you want us to read.
100%. And also keep your eyes out because we might have some more author news coming and we're very fucking excited. So please, please, please rate and review the podcast on your preferred platform. It helps us so much. Get that 5-star review with visibility. If you're on Apple, if you could type a few words, that helps even more. We would just so greatly appreciate it. So thank you all for a season 3, another season down. I genuinely can't believe it. I still call this season 2 and we're done with it.
You have multiple times.
It's fine. It's fine. But we will see you all next week with our very first Look What You Made Me Read vault track episode.
Yep. And remember, keep reading with kindness.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.